In this video, I'm going to go over how to approach sculpting a head. Sculpting the head is classically one of the hardest things to get across because it's informed by all of these things that you can see in front of you, like lots and lots of practice and anatomical knowledge that's been built up along the way. So if you don't have that sort of practice and you don't have that knowledge of anatomy, it can sometimes be frustrating. So in this video, I'm just going to go over and try and go slowly and break down and think about the decisions that I make when I'm making a head. So hopefully it can rub off, or you can use it as an example for making your own sort of styles. Fundamentally, there's 1,000,001 ways to make a head. What I'll do for this is just go through and pick up on myself making certain decisions, and then you can use that for your own sort of workflows. So the video playing in the background was an old example of practice I was doing taking a sphere to a finished head. So it roughly took about an hour, and I challenged myself not using anatomy references and things like that. In this video, and especially when you're starting out, do take into consideration that it's not going to take an hour for you to finish this head. It's probably going to take maybe a week. And combined with that, you're going to be looking at anatomy, you're going to be looking at other videos and trying to build up that references, probably at the same time while getting used to the software and used to the tools. So something I really want to make clear at this is that this is a slow process. The video that I go through isn't going to, in an hour while describing it, you're going to come out with a finished fantastic head with step-by-step processes that you can follow. It's more about taking pieces from other videos and using them in combination with practice to get your finished head. So hopefully you can find value in this video for that. When starting off with the project, what I like to do is get a base reference in from maybe an orthographic view that someone's drawn out. So the way we can do that, I'm going to start with an older video. We made a mannequin, and so that's going to be a good basis. It's probably where you'll be jumping off from. So I'm just going to find that tool. So I found the tool in the depths of my drive. So this was an older video where we started making base limbs in subtools and then eventually dynamesh them all together, just so we could focus on silhouettes and head proportions. We used a tool over here to replicate that. So we're at the stage where we want to start putting in facial features. Usually it's nice to get the face sorted and use that as a reference for the rest of the body. So we're not going to take it to its final details like all the pores and stuff, but we're going to get it to a stage where it's indicative of like a human face. So you can start with a sphere and take it out, or do it in a separate project. What we're going to do is we're just going to cut out what we've already got so we don't have to replace certain things. To start off, I'm going to just hide stuff that we don't need. Obviously at this stage the neck's not great, but I'm not too fussed about that. We can sort that out later. So with your kind of like dynameshed or whatever you'd like to start with, for this one I'm going to just mask the head off. I can split it off and make edits to it under the knowledge that I'm gonna fuse it back on with dynamesh, so I'm not too worried about the accuracy just yet, and also, which is a great thing when you're blocking out characters. So I'm going to do a very basic selection of masking using Control and Alt, and I can also paint the thing. After this, I'm going to use a subtool split feature, and I'm just going to split the mask points, so split my mask into two separate subtools. I'm going to hide the body for a later reference, and then now we're working with our head. So there's a hole at the bottom. I'm going to fix that by using dynamesh at a particular resolution. So the lower the resolution, the easier it's going to be to work with. So for example, if I'm smoothing, it's going to smooth quite a lot. If I had a higher resolution, that wouldn't work so fast. Right now, what I'm going to be doing is using a particular set of brushes. So I've made an earlier video going over the brushes that I tend to use. So I'll try and call out whenever I'm making a brush, but fundamentally the way I work is that they're on hotkeys. There's also a video for that if you want to go back to it. So in this example, I'm using Trim Dynamic just to clean up the bottom when it does come to masking. So at every stage, do remember that when you make an edit with the dynamesh, we can control and mask off to the side to reformulate that geometry so we don't get all the errors. So that's the basic setup. Seems that we have maybe a little bit of symmetry problems. That's fine, they're going to sort themselves the more we work with the clay, so I'm not too fussed about that either. There's always a way to repair these things. So to start with, I want to get a reference in, so a reference of like orthographic proportions, very similar to the Hogarth references we were using for the body. You can find multiple ones online, so you can pick and choose which ones you want. At this stage, I suggest turning off perspective, because perspective is going to cause us issues when we start to align that up. So I'm just going to go over how to bring in those references. It was covered in the last video. So when we want to do that, we're going to be using a texture. So right up here, there's a tab called texture, and then I can click this button just to dock it to the side, because we're going to be using it a lot. And so I'm going to come up to import, and I'm going to find my reference. So I found my reference, and what you want to do is select the image that comes in and then add to spotlight, this button here. Once you click that, it's going to bring up your texture into the center canvas. So you've got a gizmo with lots of edits like scale and rotation. I'm just going to scale it down and put it into the center. Not too big, not too small. If it's too big, it's going to be hard to like manipulate the edges. If it's too small, you're not going to be able to zoom in and make loads of different edits. So that's something to be taken into consideration. I'm just going to double click this to minimize it to the side. And then whenever we want to turn this texture on or off, we're going to be using Shift and Z to bring it forth and back. Next, what we're going to do is set up some cameras that we can always re-reference just to align this up every time we make specific changes. So under Documents, if you go to the Documents tab and then just dock that to the side by pressing this button, you're going to see some Z-App Link properties. So you've got front, back, right and left, and these basically lock to certain sides of the character or cameras that you define. So we're going to set some of those up. First, I'm going to make sure that perspective is off, because this is an orthographic process. I'm then going to align the top of the head or top of the mannequin and the bottom of my jaw mannequin onto this image. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to click the front button, and that's going to store that position on top of that button. So whenever we move and then re-click this, it's going to snap back. So after all your edits, it's going to come back to this area, which is really cool. The next process, I'm just going to make sure it's fronted. I'm then going to rotate it to the side and hold Shift to snap it. And then while holding Alt, I'm going to move it to the other side and then hold Shift at the same time to lock it back onto that axis. So what you can see is being set up here is two planes that we can follow. I'm going to roughly adjust it. It's not too much of a worry, because we can change it later. And then I'm going to click left, which would be the left side of his face. So once that's done, that's a really cool way of making sure that we're on track with the proportions. It doesn't get too out of hand. But also at the same time, we want to make this a nice process so we don't have to keep on clicking the side. What I would do is assign hotkeys to these certain camera positions. So I like using key 3 and 4. Depending on what you want to use, you can choose. So if you want to assign a hotkey, you can press Control and Alt, and then I'm going to click the front button first once, and now when I click the key that I want to assign, so I want to assign 3, I'm going to click 3 once. You might get an option saying that that's reconfigured, but that's going to now set the 3 key to my camera position. So doing that again, I can do it with the front side. So holding Control and Alt, I'm going to click the front side button. Now I'm going to press 4 to assign that button to the key 4. So what I've got now is whenever I press 3 and whenever I press 4, it's going to come back to these positions. So with that set up, I'm just going to reduce these, and I'm going to come back into sculpting and getting the silhouettes formed. So first of all, I'm just going to make sure that the overall silhouettes are matching. So the neck, for example, I'm going to use a move brush and use quite a large brush size just to move the edges to about where I want it. We're going to do eyes and other landmarks, so I wouldn't worry bringing out a nose, because that's going to cause a couple of errors. And then pressing 4, we can come back to the side plane and just vaguely adjust it. Same story with the ears. We're not going to be doing the ears just yet. That's going to basically be like an additive thing. Maybe sorting out the jaw and getting the scale of or the width of the neck, depending on what character you want. What I do suggest is that this, everyone's got different proportions. This can just be used as a basis, so you know that the proportions are somewhat aligned. So I'm going to press Shift and Z, and now I can come back into my free sculpting zone. One thing I do like to do originally is focus on the corners of the overall face. So something that's neglected a lot is actually the top perspective. And when you're working from the front and the side, you often get this boxy 3D representation. Now, heads aren't like that. So what you can do is start to adjust this early on in the stage so it doesn't cause you problems when you start putting landmarks and features in. So what I'm going to do, the head has a certain shape to it where it sort of tapers towards the front near the brow. And then the widest part of the head is somewhat located around here. So around there, I'm going to be targeting that to pull it out to its widest point. So very simply, with the move tool, I'm going to give it a slight taper, just so you can see that rounded front side of the face. And then because the cranium, we've got a skull here, try and think about it as more spherical. So just making and defining that shape. So we're taking it away from that boxy look. We want to get that sorted at a very early stage. Also at the same time, you might want to sort out the boxiness from the bottom. So the jaw has more of a kind of like triangle shape that leads along here. We want to define that with the move brush. So this is slightly too wide for our liking. We're just going to bring it in. So as an overall shape, we're getting closer to what a human head will be like. At the next point, we're going to go back to our references. So Shift and Z, and now I'm going to start putting in landmarks or identifiers for certain parts of the face. So I'm going to start with the front side, and then with the dam standard, I'm going to make a very small brush incision along the eye. Doesn't have to be too accurate. I just want a visual representation of where the eyes are going to be. I'm going to make it a little bit deep. We're going to change all of this later. Also, every time I put in a landmark, I want to be checking it against my other references. So while it's accurate from the front, it's not accurate from the side. So we put in that landmark, and now I'm going to go to the move brush and then just bring it up so it's roughly at the same stage. I'm not too fussed about this silhouette because we're going to insert brows and other landmarks which we can move later. I'm just focused on the eye. So eye location is sorted, and I'm pretty happy with that. What I usually like to move on to next is working around the eye socket, and more specifically the cheekbone here and where it leads off. So what I'm basically aiming for, and I'll draw it over here, is the cheekbone and something called the temporal line. So what we're going for is a cheekbone that's sort of going to be in this shape, and it's going to fade off back into the head. This is sort of the main bony landmark of masses. What we also have is something called the temporal line, and it's going to be quite a sharp edge that leads up to the back of the skull and actually leads all the way. It's a place where it's quite flat because your jaw muscles align in this sort of direction. It's how you close your jaw. But as far as geometry goes, that's quite a flat area. So thankfully there's cool ways we can flatten that out, and it's going to give us some landmarks straight away. So what I like to use is the clay brush. No special settings, just the default. What I actually like to do is hold Alt with the clay brush and just sort of draw in that line that we were speaking of. It's fairly front. Everyone's different with regards to their temporal line, but we're sort of aiming in this sort of area just to flatten that out. Combine that with the trim dynamic brush. So we've pushed it in, and now when we use the trim dynamic brush and brush that in, we can actually flatten the side of the head. And that's what we're sort of aiming for. you can see this natural bulge has come out. What that's going to turn into is the cheekbone. So, you know, if you locate just in front of your ear, in between your eye, you can feel quite a bony mass. We're going to be making that. So I'm going to add loads of clay with the clay brush around this sort of area, leading along the flattened piece that we made. Now, it's not going to be accurate to start with. We're getting a vague representation of what a skull looks like. The thing to focus on is that we're putting in landmarks which can be our references that we can use the move tool later. So right now it's just about etching it in. Also at the same time, you seem to remember we were talking about the brow and how we'd sort that out later. So with the brow, just like to add a little bit of clay here, and that's going to help us when it comes to moving this clay to better represent the silhouettes that we've saved out. With the eye, you're also more than welcome. What I like to do is make more of an eye socket, focusing on the bone instead of the eyeball itself. So with the clay brush, I can be quite aggressive here and try and make what I consider a skull. Obviously, I can use my references, or I can use my imagination, you know, making what I remember a skull to be. At this point, I want to bring out the cheekbones a little bit more. So the way I'm going to do that is etch into the sculpt rather than bringing out. So this space here, this sort of like triangular space, can be considered a sort of like empty space, the space where your cheeks stretch from your teeth, so how your teeth are pushing your skin across to the back of the head here. So with the clay brush, I'm going to hold Alt and then just sort of brush and give that Deadpool look, you know, the classic plane which gives quite a sharp edge leading from the corner of the eye or the front of the cheekbone all the way to around the chin and mouth area. Again, I'm not too focused on how accurate it is because we can change it after. What I also like to do at the same time is use smooth quite aggressively just so it vanishes back into the mesh. At this point, it's probably worth defining a jaw because this section's getting a bit confusing. I'm not going to use the side views just yet. I'm just going to indicate where jawline should be. So the shape we're aiming for is sort of this direction, and it's going to fall slightly in front of the ear. You can always reference your own head. So I'm going to bring it up here, sort of this direction. The main focus is that we have something to move and something that we can see. So I'm just going to smooth all this out and then refine it a little bit more with the dam standard. Then with the move tool, you know, obviously it's looking a bit strange. We want to bring this neck slightly in. You can use the move tool to better define and separate the jaw away from the neck. And then if it's looking a bit too wobbly at points, you can use the trim dynamic just to round it off to give it a bit more of a cylindrical shape. And then again, just smoothing it over quite aggressively. At this point, we're starting to get more landmarks. So I'd suggest looking at the accuracy of these landmarks. So again, we can bring back our Shift and Z, and I'm going to press 3. And I'm just going to make sure everything's aligned to my character roughly. So, you know, the eye sockets still need to be in a respectable place. And then looking from the front, our character's gone a bit thin just because we've done so many clay edits. I'm just going to bring him out slightly. So from the front perspective, if I was going to be dragging his head to the side, if you can see where this red dot is indicated, I'd actually be pulling the front of his head here. Now that would look really funny in terms of the character because, as we said before, from the top, the widest part of the head is actually located here. So when I'm looking at the front, I actually want to aim my cursor towards the back. So when I am making these edits, it's actually drawing out the backside. And then that means it's just going to be more accurate in terms of our anatomy. So when you are making changes from the front and side perspective, where you are collecting geometry does matter. So for example, with the jawline, where we're actually adjusting it does matter. We wouldn't collect clay from up here to adjust the jawline because it's going to change everything else. So reasonably happy with that. I do want to focus on putting in more landmarks before I really refine the eye area or the ears. So next what we're going to do is the mouth box. So with the mouth, you've got lips that are sort of like resting upon teeth. And so what I like to focus on is the separation that happens around them. So you've got a little transition that happens from your bottom lip to your chin, which sort of like defines your chin. I'm just going to reset my brushes here because I think something's changed. If you want to reset brushes, go brushes, reset all brushes. That's better. So I'm not drawing a mouth here. I'm drawing the little cavity that happens above the chin and just below the lower mouth, so where the teeth are, and I'm going to smooth that out. I'm also going to do the separation that happens in between the nose and the top of the lip, so that sort of be located where the top of your teeth are, or where your gums would be. And these are just little indicators to bring out a little bit of mass here, which you now can see is what your teeth would be. So I'm going to get the clay brush and then make what's called a mouth barrel. So very lightly, I'm just going to brush in this direction, and it's giving the effect of, if you know, in the Matrix when the guy's mouth is like gone back over. That's the thing I'm trying to achieve. It's just a clump of mass or an assortment of clay that I can move to make sure I've got my proportions ready. So at this point, I'm going to go back to my side references and just make sure that this collection of teeth, or this mouth box, is positioned in the right place in regards to everything else. So I can move the chin, I can move that back into place, and then also come from the front, and then just make sure that, you know, the bottom of our nose and the top of our lip that we etched in is located in the right place. It's going to save us down the line. It's going to save us a lot of time. It's also about the same width, so the cheeks are going to end here, like I've said, and the barrel is starting from the front. So we put in the landmark, and now we're roughly happy with the position that this is going to be where we're going to be sculpting lips. Next feature, we are missing a nose. So with the nose, a nice little trick that I like to do is, if we go from the side and bring this out, I'm just going to mask a little square just so I can see from the front where I want the nose to be located, and then going to come out and come from the front. Obviously it's going to be this area. Now what I like to do is use clay tubes. Clay tubes is a really good way of building up mass fast. So I'm going to focus a little bit to the side with lots of individual taps, and then I'm going to make the bridge of the nose lead up. So the first thing I define is how far I want the nose to go out, and then the rest of it is just blending it back into the head with a nice sort of like slope. That's how I like to think about it. At this point you're probably losing a bit of resolution, and because we're a dynamesh we can just control and drag out to the side, and that's going to reform some geometry. We've got a nose landmark that we've put in. Again, it's the same process of rinse and repeating, and just making sure that it looks good from the side and it looks good from the front. So we've drawn the nose in, and now it's just a case of repositioning it back to our sort of like anatomy standards. So from the side it looks good, and then from the front is reasonable. The nose really comes out when you start to refine it, so we're not too fussed about that. What you can do, if it is annoying you, you can use the trim dynamic and just thin it out ever so slightly, so you've got more a nose shape. Also at the same time, you can define where it meets the head itself, you know, sort of where the nostrils come out, with a damn standard brush. Just come in and make a little moon shape. There's not enough resolution here, so what I'm going to do is come to dynamesh and then turn the resolution up. After that I'm going to re-dynamesh it by drawing it out, and it's given us some more resolution. So when I come to dynamesh it, I can actually make the transition that happens from the main head into the nose. Don't get too carried away with shaping the nose. We're going to do that all later. Next, what I want to be doing is potentially putting in some eyes, or just smoothing out areas that are a bit too distracting for me. That's fine there. So with the ears, we're going to be aiming roughly behind the jaw that we made, and from the top of the nose and to the bottom of the nose as standard. That's kind of like the general rule. It's obviously going to be different. One thing I did notice was that the reference here isn't too accurate in terms of anatomy and proportions, so sometimes references can be wrong, but always look at real life references if you're ever in doubt. So I'm just going to mask with the normal pen an ear shape, and then I'm going to invert that mask by control clicking off to the side. So now we've got the ear selected. I'm going to come to the move tool up here, the gizmo. Now once that's selected, I can move this this gizmo by holding Alt and then touching the corner side here. I'm going to aim for the front of the lobe just there, and then looking from the front I can then move this to the side, and then I'm just going to aim roughly where the ear pivot's going to be. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a nice representation. I'm then going to approach from the top, and then without pressing Alt I'm going to actually move this clay to the side, roughly aim for about 30 degrees. Obviously it depends on the person, but that's going to give us an ear shape. So it's not the perfect ear, but it's something that we can get an idea for proportions. What I like to do is get a damn standard brush and then just go in quite hard. If I read dynamesh here, if I go in quite hard to separate the ear away from the back of the head. That's something that's overlooked quite a lot. You're more than welcome to put an ear hole in there if it helps you out, just for location wise, but ideally just leave it as it is, because it's going to be a landmark. So I'm going to smooth that out. Next, what I'd probably suggest is inserting some form of eye and eyeball. So what I tend to do is actually draw some clay eyes in and then later replace them. I find that easy, but at the same time you can also insert your own eyeballs at an early stage. So with the eyes, I'm going to come to our subtool section, and I'm going to come to append. Under append there's going to be a sphere 3D, and that's going to bring in this subtool sphere. When I select that, I'm going to use the gizmos up here to just readjust it, scale it, and put it in the eye socket. Now there are certain proportions that we can use as a guidance. It's not always the perfect thing, but there's an option called transparent or edit opacity here. So once I click that, I can see through the head and see the object that I'm adjusting. So I'm just going to scale the eyeball. Roughly what we're aiming for is a 5 eyeballs width from the head. So there's going to be one eyeball in the center, which then leads on to a second eyeball here, and then we're going to have one eyeball length that leads to the end of the head. So we got pretty good accuracy already, and then I'm going to aim it right there. Obviously we're going to be doing it from the side. Use your references and use anatomical knowledges. We could try and use this as a reference as well. So just where the eye is going to rest like that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. After you've placed the eye, we're going to come up to Z plugins. I'm going to dock that to the side. Under Subtool Master, I'm going to come to Mirror. And then after Mirror, I'm going to merge it into one subtool along the X-axis. And that's basically going to put the eye onto the other side. Going to minimize this. Next, it's really a case of adjusting everything else so it fits with the eyes that you've done. Maybe if they feel like they're too close together, you can slightly adjust them. But I would try and keep the eyes as sort of like an anchor point. I'm just going to open up the area around the eye so it's more like an eye socket. What you'll also find is a place that's often overlooked is the location here. The reason for that is you can't actually see it from many perspectives. You just have to know where it's pretty much located. So here I'm going to make a movement. I'm focused on a line in my head which kind of like leads up to here. I want to bring this back so it's roughly represented to be like this eventually. So that's the line that I'm moving backwards. I just want it to be flattened out. So I'm going to get the move tool and then just bring it back so it's more accurate and it leads down to the mouth box. When I make those movements, you can see that this cavity is starting to forming, which creates this nice mouth box, which then also assists in other parts of the mouth. So that's something I'd sort of focus on. I'm going to put in a nostril area. So with clay, I'm just going to build that up a bit just so it's more representative of a human. At the same time, I could also add a bit of clay just to indicate where eyelids could be. So it's going to look a bit funny because we don't have enough resolution, but I'm going to add loads of clay here. I'm going to try and wrap it around the eye, soften it out, and then use the dam standard to sort of slit it out. My suggestion would be to hide this and use the inverse of a dam standard to create an eye line like this. So it's going to be quite a sharp line. First we want to get the eyeball in and then do the normal dam standard on the inside just to give that sharp transition. So when I bring it back, I can then start to get the move tool and then bring the eyelids out and try and position it in a way that I see fit. You can also blend this back in by using the clay brush, and that's just going to almost fill in skin between where the bone and the eye cap itself meet. So once we fill in that area, it looks a bit more realistic in terms of how the skin rests on top of it. So if we take it from the side, I'm just going to fill in the eye socket to where it meets the eye very gently, but then I'm going to leave parts of it where it does lead back into the eye socket. So eyes are very, very complicated, but if you first start with the eye socket and then bring out geometry, you get some quite nice transitions. I'm not going to focus too much on the silhouette of the eyes themselves. That's, you know, a dark black hole. So what I can do is just adjust them so they're wider in the center, and then they slowly get thinner towards the sides, and that's going to be good enough for the time being. Next, what I'm going to do is bring back a little bit of mouth. So with the mouth, there's a cool trick we can do. First, we want to make sure that as a whole it looks like it's positioned in the right place. It also has the correct amount of mass. The chin looks decent, and the jawline leads off nicely onto the cheekbones. What we really want to focus on is quite a large area. If I draw it here, we're looking for quite a large triangle or a square off here, and we want this section to be quite flat, and also at the same time we want this section to be quite flat, which is going to give us a very slight edge here, and obviously it's going to give us our jawline, and then where our cheekbone leads off into the mouth box. So the way I'm going to try and achieve that is using the trim dynamic, and with the trim dynamic I'm going to be quite harsh here and just focus on creating that line we made up into the other line, which leads back this way to the corner of the jaw where the muscles all sit. And then I'm also going to make another slight triangle here and then adjust that depending on what my reference is. You're more than welcome to sort of like sharpen up the bottom of the jaw just so you can see where it is, so it makes a bit more sense. So I'm okay with the position of the mouth. Sometimes for making the mouth, I like to define and separate it from the cheek. So what we can do is go from the end of the nose and then just get a damn standard line and aim sort of either side of the mouth. And what that's going to do is going to separate the cheek. sort of this mass, depending on how much fat you've got. It's going to create this nice little area, and then it's going to give us a line that we can manipulate to make it look and transition a bit better. So for this, I'm going to widen it and curve it ever so slightly, and then I'm also going to bring back this line with the move tool, just so it's separated from our mouth. Again, you'd be using references. I'm not using references for this. I'm just sort of guessing, but this is sort of where the mouth would be defined. Always smooth aggressively, so just smooth it out. Look at it from different angles. So from the front side, just check we're on track, depending on how big the chin is. Check we're on track for the side. And then one that's often forgotten is the 3/4 perspective. So when we're looking at the character from this perspective, what I usually try to aim for is a lead off like this. So usually the brow that we've made over here, you know, that kind of geometry that we built up, that's going to have a slight overhang, and then a little cavity is going to be created due to the eye socket that we have. This is basically going to be empty space. This little bulb here that comes out, that's going to be our cheekbone, that sort of mass that's sticking out. That's what's creating this sort of silhouette. And then the line that goes down here back to the mouth barrel or the mouth box is created by this little triangle that we were creating, you know, that flat side. So it's this area. And then we're going to have, depending on the size of the lips and how full the lips are, this might be a little bulge, and that's basically the mouth barrel that we made. This sort of area. It's going to divot in. This is going to be the line here where we separate the mouth box from the chin. That was at a very early stage, so that's going to be the divot that's created here. And then depending on the chin, it's going to bulge out a little bit and transition back to the chin. Again, depending on what the chin was. The top of the line that leads up here, depending on the size of the cranium, or if it's male or female, they're all different. This is created by the temporal line. So this sort of flat area that we created and made this line, that's what we're going to be focusing on for this sort of silhouette. So with all those things in mind, we're going to try and make a couple of edits to clean it up and just clear this. So first, the one that sticks out is this area. I'm going to bring that in to make more of the eye socket. I'm just going to come back to the clay tool and redefine that temporal line and really etching quite hard. This little area that's created is actually a piece of bone of the eye socket, and that's going to be what's creating the silhouette here. So I want to remove these parts of the clay so they're not intruding on my 3/4 cylinder here. So I'm basically going to grab this area and just pull it back. And now when I come from the side, it should transition a little bit better. And obviously I can change the full transition here and then smooth it all out. So that's a bit more accurate. Next, I want to make sure that this goes in slightly and that the mouth box is well defined. So I've got this nice sort of transition. Maybe even here, just build up the cheek. So one thing you can do is I'm applying clay here, but when in actual fact my eyes are looking in this location to see how it's affecting the silhouette. So I'm etching in the eyeball, but I'm really focusing on the left side just to sort that area out. And then once that landmark's in, I can start to redefine the area as I please. And that's obviously going to be informed by all the anatomy that you study. So with the mouth, what I like to do is first create the initial mouth slit. This is going to change at a later date. The next thing I'm going to do is lead on from the top of the nose and to the top of the chin and create this sort of upside down love heart, I guess you could call it. Something in the shape of this. Next I'm going to do, I'm going to get the inverse of a dam standard and just try and define my mouth and lip edge. So that's going to help me when I start moving things out. I'm not going to close it up because what I'm going to do is I'm going to further etch in sort of like the corner of the mouth So he's looking a bit Homer Simpson-y, but it's fine because we're going to smooth everything out. We're not going to see anything. The next I'm going to do is insert right in between here where the mouth splits at birth. And then once I've done this, I'm just going to, instead of having this sort of like convex, I'm going to make it concave with the clay brush and then just etch it down like that. So that's generally where the mouth's going to go. Obviously he's looking long in the face, so once I've put in these landmarks and smooth them over, the more you smooth it, the easier it is to refine it later. So what I'm going to do is move the lips up just so I know where things are located, and get a rough representation from my smoothed mesh, my really smooth mesh, where things are going to be. The mouth edges, so with the mouth edges I like to put a little dot and then make sure they're somewhat aligned to the center of the eyes. So you can widen the mouth up. Also at this point I'm going to change the edges of the head because they're getting a bit too large. When you're changing the silhouettes from the side, sometimes it's good to approach it from the back and bring them in, because that's some of the hardest places to adjust. So I'm liking the silhouettes that's going on here, and from the front I'm just going to adjust the skull. He's looking a bit squared, so I'm just going to round that off with the move brush. With the whenever you're making mouth edits, I like to brush in a particular direction, so everything's going to lead from these origins and then terminate themselves at these locations. So you want to be brushing in this sort of direction and this direction to make your mouth muscles flow in a particular way. The same with the corner of the mouth and the edges of the mouth. You want to be bringing those in. You can come with the trim brush if you want to better define the planes of the face. So here we can just adjust the transition from the top of the mouth, the top of the lip, the bottom of the chin, the top of the chin, and obviously the nose. We want to keep it quite mechanical at the moment, just so we can rediscover sort of like edges and then place them where we want. For the corners of the mouth, what I like to do is make sure you've got a nice arch going on, so sort of like a C shape. You can only really see that from the bottom. So what we're going to do is just bring this back so it looks like, imagine how the shape of the teeth will be. That's going to be the shape of the mouth because the lips are resting on the teeth. So I can move that into position. Coming back, areas that I don't like are the transition of the brow. So what I can do is come in here with the trim dynamic or the standard brush and just make this incision here. It gets quite deep because of the eye socket and how it transitions to the nose bone here. So obviously depending, I can come in and refine it. I can use the trim dynamic to isolate the brow away from the main head. I can sharpen up the transition that happens from the nose to the brow by just using a damn standard, and that's going to create a nice cut depending on ethnicities and things like that. With this lead off, I like the skin to flow down in this direction, so sort of like this. What we've got here is quite a large bulbous area, which isn't quite nice. I want the nose to finish off quite flat. So if we get rid of that, I can try and insert. So what I'm going to do is use a clay and just take away some edges there, and also use the dam standard to properly define the nose away from the main skull, and then again really going in deep with this corner to take it away from the eyes. At every stage, continue to just over soften it. It's kind of naturally looking a bit Asian, I'd say. And then with dam standard, I always like to take away the nose from the main head, just so I can see it from the side. Next, I probably want to sort out the neck transition. So with the neck transition, I want to bring it in slightly and focus on making somewhat of a cylinder shape. and then we're going to put muscles in which really define how it's connected to the main head. I'm just going to bring it out further so we have more clay to work with. I'm going to make this transition a bit softer so it leads all the way down, and then use the clay brush just to make sure that this is more cylindrical than it is sort of like going back into the head like that. Use trim dynamic. So from the side, usually what you want to do is be quite harsh with the corner of the jaw, and then you can obviously build that up to bring it out. When we get further down, depending on your age, you get sort of like a hanging skin here. It's going to be in the shape sort of like this, and everything after this point is going to be quite tapered and cut, and then really cut in the corner. But from here, it's a bit of a transition that goes on like that. So I'm going to try and insert that. So the sharp transition, and then I'm going to smooth it and blur it. And then from the side, I can either bring this down or better define his chin like this. It purely depends on the character itself. And then insert some curvature. With the neck, what I like to do is put in some muscles. So for the first muscle, we have sort of like the trap hair. It leads up towards the back. I'm going to use clay tubes and basically brush down in this direction from near the back of the ear, like this. And then once I've got that inserted, I want to make a little bit of a negative space where that finishes. So just using Alt and clay tubes just to take away some piece, and then again smoothing aggressively. The next is going to be a muscle that leads all the way from underneath like this. Again, everything's covered by skin, so you don't want to be putting in the perfect representation of the muscle. You just want to be putting in sort of like masses and flows, because when we come to smooth it out, it then starts to look a bit more like a neck. You're more than welcome to put things like Adam's apples in and with clay tubes and just get a feel for the character. After this, we haven't looked at the front and side references for a while. We might have gone off track from those. So side's looking fairly good. Front is okay. We could probably widen it up and change the eye position. So I'm going to get a really large move brush and then just bring it out so he's got a wider face, and make the eyeballs themselves longer, so the eye slits are longer. From this point, I would really focus on using perspectives. So I'm less concerned about my front and side perspectives. I know they're somewhat right. I'm now just trying to put in a bit more character. So I'll go through and make some edits. So here what I'm focusing on is I put in a couple of planes to bring back landmarks that I could fill in. Also looking at how certain parts of the face, so we're looking at more secondary details, how they're made up. The side of the head here in this location would be the largest or the widest part of the head. I just want to bring that back. And then also towards about this area is the widest part of what I'd considered like the face. So I'm just going to bring this out. Because that is the widest part of the face, obviously I wouldn't have the jawline exceeding that area. So I'm going to come back towards the back of the jaw and bring that in. So there's all these little tricks that you can find, and small adjustments based on the references that you look at. I'm just going to go through speed up, and just so you can see a couple of moves that can happen to improve the mesh. So for the lips, lips can be quite difficult. What I want to put in is a bit more resolution that we can play with. What I would start to do is try and get some planes of the face. So if we use Dam Standard, just bringing back the lip edge, the inside of the mouth itself, all these small edits are going to change the expression of the character, so it is a really delicate operation. With Dam Standard and Alt, I'm going to define the bottom of the lip. At this stage, I'm going to think about fatty deposits. So around the corner of the mouth, depending on the expression, I'm going to get clay and bring out this sort of like fatty area. Just in between the chin and splitting the face in two, I can get clay and do the inverse. And that's going to create what is made by our bottom teeth, this sort of like transition that goes to the top of the lip. At this point, I would adjust the lip shape to how you'd want it to be. There's obviously this classic shape of the lips that you have. I would use these references and then just move the edges of the lip to indicate something that's a bit more accurate. So using loads of small adjustments of the move tool. You can also use pinch. So pinch is a good brush where we can just get the corners of the mouth and sort of like bring them together, and you get more of a lip shape. If ever it looks a bit ducky, what you can do is get a clay brush and then just brush in downwards directions from the mouth, from the nose, sort of like water falling down, and that brings back the original mouth barrel that we used. And basically long transitions of flow that go in these sort of directions that I'll draw. So whenever you're drawing out clay, I suggest brushing in this sort of direction, also leading out from here, so you want to be brushing in this direction. When it comes to this area, you want to be brushing in this sort of direction, and then with the chin you want to be brushing in that direction. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's what I found is a nice sort of flow and transition. You also have secondary forms that can sort of brush from here and then outwards like that. And so let's give those a go. So that's good progress. I'll show main parts of the lip, so how we can start to think about the lips themselves. Again, I'm going to give more resolution just for the demonstration. It's usually something you'd leave to the end, but I'm going to do them now because I know it's a big problem area. So if I hold Shift and Control, I'm just going to box out this area to isolate the lips. I'm then going to Control Shift and Alt the backside just to hide that. So now we're just working with lips. There are a couple of ways to do it. The way I prefer to do is build the bottom lip first. So we want to get rid of this flatness and give it a bit more bulkiness. A good one for this is using the clay and also something called magnify. Magnify is going to make it a bit more rounded and voluminous. So we're sort of like bringing out the lips. The bottom lip's going to be slightly softer, while at the same time being larger. You're going to have a very slight indication of a split here, and if I use the clay brush I can round it off by just dragging from the top and the bottom, and then it has these nice accidental lines which can be considered the puffiness of the lips. As we go in, there's less that starts to happen. Depending on the lip structure, we can bring it in here. For the top of the lip, think about the beak, or what I like to call the beak of the lip that sort of comes out here. You might have a definition of split there, depending again on the person, and then the top lip sometimes has a little bit of an overhang that comes all the way from that split that we made, and then leading back into here. So the the top lip's going to rest on top of the bottom lip when it comes to the corners, and then the bottom lip's going to slightly vanish off into non-existence. You can sort of like try and define that with a bit of a trim dynamic just by fusing it off. And then obviously when it comes to painting, it's going to look more defined, and then when we come back over, we can get more secondary forms and define the corner of the lip, which just separates it from the rest of the mouth, which gives it that classic look. Just smooth those over. I would try not to make the perfect line sort of like going like this. Do try and feather it and make it look as natural as possible, and then once you've made those edits, you can come back in and change the emotion of the lip, or maybe even just get a large magnify and then increase certain areas of it. So we could easily spend hours and hours on it. It's been a bit strange going it and making it really slowly. Usually this is something I do very quickly, sort of like, making edits without having to explain it. But hopefully you did find some value in some of those techniques and how to build up a basic mesh. So once you've finished with that, that's something that we can fuse back onto the head and then further refine certain areas by using references. He's looking a bit like Patrick Stewart. So maybe I had Patrick Stewart on the head, who knows.